Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Once again, we get to hear a story of how the Holy Spirit touched someone's life. And in this case, our guest, Heather King, we list her as formerly unchurched, but you're going to find out that in many ways, Heather has maybe a little bit of a familiar story in the beginning. I don't know her story yet, but the idea of people who are kind of brought up in the church, but it never clicked, and then they left. And I know that a lot of you Catholics who watch this program have had siblings and children who brought up in the church, but it just didn't click and they're gone. What do we do? How can we reach out? Well, maybe we'll hear a little bit about that in our story tonight. This is Heather King. Heather, welcome to The Journey Home.
Thank you, Marcus. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here. Great to have you here. I'm anxious to also hear about your book you've written, Sure to Flame, A Year with St. Teresa of Lisieux, right? Because you said she had a big part.
Yes.
In your journey. So we'll leave that to the end. I'll just back away a little bit now. Let's hear your story, if you would. Start us off at the beginning.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a long journey and ongoing, as I say. Right. Well, I was born on the coast of New Hampshire, a small town. I guess every town in New Hampshire is small, but I was born in 1952. And my family, my father was a bricklayer. It was a blue-collar family. So my father was a bricklayer. My mother was a housewife. My father had 2 kids that he had brought with him from a previous marriage, as it turned out. And then he and my mother had 6 children together, and I'm the oldest of those 6. So it was a beautiful town. It's on the coast. And I think from a very young age, as I look back, I had a deep God sense. I had a deep sense of the mystical. My paternal grandmother lived literally on the ocean on Rye Beach, and I used to get to go there as a kid and spend weekends. And I just loved solitude then and now. And I loved unstructured time. And I remember I would sit under this little spruce tree, and there were these lilies of the valley, these little tiny flowers that are like fairy-sized flowers, and they smell beautiful. And it was dark and quiet and secret in there. And I remember just, as I look back, this sense that now I know was really a sense of the world beyond this one. And so I always had that as a kid. And I do think I had a deep longing for God, a longing like every kid does, to be good, to make your parents proud, all of that. So, but, and I want to really pay homage to my parents. We were not Catholic. We grew up Protestant. We lived right across the street from the Congregational Church, right. Protestant, 4 square, the steeple, unadorned, plain, severe. God is the high school principal. Don't get too close. Get straight A's, but don't get too close. And that was kind of my sense of God. I joke that my sense of God was based on New England weather, 9 months of hell and then 3 months of paradise for the summer. And so I got it. I had you pay for every moment of... I have a deep sort of Calvinist streak in me. And I also sometimes say I became a Catholic for something softer than the sort of Puritan work ethic.
But I was thinking about your description of that, always had this sense of the other, the sense of God in that culture. I mean, New England has a long history, as you mentioned, of the Congregationalists and the Puritans and the Calvinism that's there. I mean, it's in the air you breathe in a way, but that's also led to a lot of things like Unitarianism and the whole mysticism and the small little groups.
Right.
So there's a sense of this other, but who is this other?
Right.
It's often left unsaid.
Well, and the cross has no body on it in the Protestant church. So it's the God who's far away, or that's how I interpret it, how you have to sort of look for like a needle in a haystack. I did have Catholic friends growing up. That we had Our Lady of Miraculous Medal Church in Hampton, the next town over. So I had friends who went to CCD, but this was pre-Vatican II. And in those days, you did not go into a Catholic church. I mean, it was literally, there was a real sense of, this is taboo, this is scary, you're not welcome. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of compelled in a way without knowing anything about it. But anyway, and I went to Sunday school. We went to Sunday school. My mother in particular was a deep believer and a churchgoer and saw to it, God bless her, that we all had a grounding in So I went to Sunday school for 8 years, and I didn't. To me, Sunday school, we had the little Bible, and I still have that childhood Bible, and it had those kind of cheesy color plates, and it just seemed like it took place so long ago, all of it, right? Jesus in the tunic and the little sandals in the desert, and so I liked him, but it just seemed so removed from my life. And even as a kid, you were very aware, without having the words for it, of the fall, of any kind of crack in your family system, any kind of anxiety on your parents' part, all of that. But I just thought God was this kind of distant sort of thing, extraneous to life, not the heart of your life. I do remember there was the parable where the hemorrhaging woman touches the hem of Christ's robe and was healed. And in the picture, stars, she was on her knees and stars came out from his robe. And that really compelled me. And aren't we compelled by the parables? Yeah. They're so striking. So that I thought, oh, wow, I really got, that is some kind of very, very special power.
So you had some seeds
just
planted.
Touches clothes. Absolutely. Yep. So the seeds were planted. Meanwhile, I was very bookish, still the same way. I will sort of participate and be the life of the party, and then I want to be left alone. I'm a major introvert. I recharge in silence and solitude. And I was like that as a kid in this big family, so I was always trying to find some little place to get off and read. And I was a straight A student. I was very, very, I guess it probably wasn't that hard to shine in. It was a small town, but I was a straight A student. I was on the basketball team. I won the spelling bee. I had all these I was valedictorian in my 8th grade class. So I had all these sort of outward signs of incipient success. But inside, even as a kid, I felt the fissure, the crack. I felt something was not right. I felt I was not worthy somehow. And who knows where this comes from? Does it come from a family system? My parents were not alcoholics, but I have tons of alcoholism on both sides of the family. Turned out I was an alcoholic. A bunch of my siblings are. So who knows? But the point is, when I was a freshman in high school, I took my first drink. 13 years old. I hadn't even attained my full height. And for me, and this is true of every alcoholic I've ever met, it was, most people don't remember their first drink. It wasn't a red letter. But for me, it was like before Christ, after Christ. I mean, it was literally
like a conversion experience.
Yes, it was a fake conversion experience. It was a feeling that so cataclysmically unifying, or so it seemed. I felt at one with myself. I felt like I was enough for the first time in my life. I felt I loved the people around me. This would not be a good thing when I started hanging out in bars. And I felt at
it brought you out of your introversion? I mean, is that what it was doing?
Partly. I think that was part of it. It made it so that I could be around people. It also made it so I could be around boys. And I mean, I was in puberty, so there's this huge, the other cataclysmic, simultaneously compelled by and terrified by, and, oh, will a boy like me? And so it made all of that easier, or so it seemed. But it was a feeling deep inside of being at one really with God, with the universe. And even that first time I drank, all that is immediately followed by really bad repercussions. I threw up, I blacked out, which means I was outwardly conscious but had no recollection the next day. I had a horrible hangover. I had huge mood swings. And then I got in trouble, of course, at home. Horrible, horrible hangover. And the minute I could get up again, I called my girlfriend who had gotten the beer and said, when can we do it again? So you can, I think alcoholism, it is a mystery. To this day, the medical profession has not been able to find the cause or the cure. To me, it's almost like the demoniac in the Bible who froths at the mouth. It is a kind of possession. That doesn't absolve me from one iota of responsibility for anything I did under the sway of alcohol, but it is not something that you ask for, to have that kind of reaction to alcohol. And for the next 20 years, that was my God. I was an absolute thrall to alcohol. It became my organizing principle. Everything revolved around it. What I did for work, who I hung out with, how I spent my time, how I spent my money.
Well, and the danger is that a young person doesn't know
Right.
whether that one drink is going to be okay
Whether they have that
or
thing.
whether they're going to have.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's why the medical community calls it a disease, because it makes it manageable, but that's not exactly it either, right? I mean, right? I mean, it's like you said, it's hard to put a nail on it.
It's hard to put a name, and that's why I think it's essentially a religious existential disorder. And I laugh, it's the only disease where if you have it, people don't feel sorry for you. They just want you to stop passing out at the table and stealing their money. But trust me, I mean, and it has nothing to do with willpower. I have incredible, almost frightening amounts of willpower. And in fact, in the throes of acute alcoholism, this was several years down the road when I was 29. I was living in Boston at the time. I graduated from college with a degree in social service. I had no desire to work in social service, by the way. I had this deep
As
call
an
of-
introvert.
yeah, well, I know, but I kind of wanted, but I always had the thing to be holy, you know? I always was drawn to that. And we were really for the underdog in our house. You know, we were a blue collar family. My father loved to recite poetry, and he had a deep heart for the welfare mother and the little league pitcher with leukemia and all of that. And I too had, I mean, as any sort of decent, sensitive human being does, you have a feeling for the poor and the suffering. So I wanted to help, but the fact is I really needed a social worker myself by that time. So anyway, I graduated. I was a waitress the whole time that I drank. Horrible waitress, ADD, hungover, no concept of service, surly, just horrible, horrible waitress. And that's how I supported myself.
Did you work at Durgan Park, Faneuil Square?
No. I
They always
worked
had a
at Legal
reputation of the waitresses
Seafoods,
being.
right, yeah. But I lived right around there. So, and so when I was 29, and things were just not, you know, all the people that I had sort of come up with were settling down and getting married and having children. I was at the bar increasingly, sort of the time during the day when I would start drinking, it was getting earlier and earlier. And so I decided, there was a law school right up the street from my loft, this kind of single room occupancy, Skid Row, more or less hotel where I lived, that I thought I was being arty. But anyway, Suffolk Law School was right up the street, and I knew I would be too hungover to commute. So I thought, I'll go to law school. I'm good at taking tests. I can do it. And I applied to this one law school, again, though I had no real desire to be a lawyer. But I figured this is something I can do. And I knew my drinking was a problem. I thought, I'll go to law school and I'll just taper off, not stop, taper down on my drinking. Takes 3 years for law school. And by the time I get out, I'll be an ACLU lawyer. I'll help the disenfranchised and the suffering of the world. And that was my plan. So I went to law school, and my willpower got me through. I have massive willpower on everything except drugs and alcohol. So I in the throes of acute alcoholism, went through law school, graduated with honors, passed the Massachusetts bar on the first try. I was daily morning drinker by this time. So,
Well, our guest is Heather King. I want to make sure I get that in for. It amazes me, you know, that you remembered what you needed to for the tests. You know, if you're always inebriated, you know, that's amazing that you got through all that.
well, you sober up. You do a very disciplined kind of military. You go, quote, on the wagon for 16-hour days to study for the finals. Yeah. So you sober up. And I mean, I had sort of, in some way,
So there's where the willpower kicks in.
Well, and also I like to get straight. I like A's. Okay. I like the approval. Right. I like, So I will do what I have to do that at any kind of self-punishment and self-discipline in order to do that. So, and I say that to illustrate that alcoholism is not a matter of willpower. If I could do that, why couldn't I stop drinking? So I graduated from law school. My poor parents, my father, the bricklayer, had helped put me. He would send me $200
Wow.
right? And they were so proud of me and so worried about me and so proud. And I graduated and I couldn't sit up straight really for 8 hours. I went back to waitressing, and that was when I went back really hardcore. Not went back, I'd never stopped drinking, but I was at the bar at 8 a.m. in the morning, like old men's bar. Yeah, I was 33, 34. And I hit a bottom of really pathological isolation, of existential despair. And I really thought, I'm going to die, and so be it. That's the price you pay. And I had a moment just before my family had an intervention. I had some friends in Nashville, and they said, "Why don't you come down? You need a rest, honey." What they saw, the shape I was in. I went down. My friends went off to work, and I was drunk already one day, or half drunk. And I went into the woods, and I was so exhausted on every level. And I saw this tree trunk. It had lichen on it, had little ants, and I realized, this is something beautiful. I can't feel it. I am dead. And I sank to my knees, and I literally said the one prayer I knew: "Our Father who art in heaven." Just the atheist in the foxhole. I knew if I don't stop drinking, I'm going to die. And from the depths of my being, because deep inside every man, woman, and child, right? The fundamental idea of God. And I'll tell you, when I got to deliver me from evil, it was like Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. I was sweating tears of blood, and I just said, "Deliver me from evil." I totally got, really in that moment, almost the whole Christ, the whole what the battle is between, right, this world and, between good and evil. Really, in that my soul was a battleground. And afterwards I looked up the word sincere, and it means without decay. And it was probably the most sincere prayer of my life. I didn't stop drinking then. I went in, I sort of got up and I said, "Oh my Lord, did I pray?" I wasn't, again, anti-God. I just thought God was for sort of uneducated, sort of simple people who were not sophisticated and worldly like I was.
But I also wonder, and of people that I've known who've struggled with alcoholism, did you feel yourself unworthy to talk to God?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why, again, I wasn't hostile to God. I think the sense especially in an alcoholic, because the stuff that I was doing out in the bars, I was out just searching for love, let's say, deep sense of unworthiness. If there is a God, he would want nothing to do with the likes of me. Oh my God, I really felt I put myself so far beyond the pale that I wasn't worthy to approach, the throne of, so I went inside, I started drinking, but 3 months later, I think my family had an intervention, and they sent me off to this rehab in Minnesota, and I sort of went under duress, 30 days, and something happened there, and I really and it took me years to look back and say, it was that moment in the woods when I prayed that teeny opening, right? That God is just waiting to rush in and help, but he won't. He's not going to do it against our will. So we have to, just like he says, just turn to me for a second, right? So anyway, I went off to that 30 days, and sometime during that 30 days, I can't pinpoint the second, that obsession to drink, that demonic obsession was lifted. It was just lifted. And I went from, oh, how could I live without alcohol, to why would I ever want to go back to that? Maybe there's another life for me. And again, now I had no kind of theology or religion at that point at all, but afterwards I looked back and I said, see, that was my first cognizance of the merciful God. I really was the prodigal daughter. He saw me coming from a long way up. The God of mercy, who does not keep score. We keep score against ourselves and against each other. He doesn't keep score, because I had nothing to offer. I had a really, really bad track record, and I saw this was just unmerited grace and a gift that this thing had been lifted. And I think, we talk so much about how can we sort of evangelize, how do we invite people in? And all I can say is nothing will more sort of intensely invite us to step up to the plate than knowing that we've done something wrong and receiving unmerited forgiveness and mercy. Christ knew human nature well. Did he not know us? Is this not what we say, the penitential rite, the first thing at Mass? This is what blocks us, because our own guilt and our sense of unworthiness is what will block us from that full joy in life.
You mentioned the prodigal daughter. There you were, right? And when you think of that wonderful parable of the two brothers, there's that line when it says that the prodigal son came to himself. He came to himself. When he was down in the bottom, all that he did, but it took him getting all the way down to the point where he's even willing to eat the slop of the pigs, and he came to himself. So we see in that the grace of God, like you at that little stump in the woods, but he still had to respond. He still had to say, I'm going back to my... He still had to respond, because he didn't have to. He could have turned right around. And that's what you're saying. There was a both and. Work of God, but yet you're willing to respond.
Yes, you have to that's right. He invites our cooperation. That's right. And isn't that beautiful? He came to himself, and it almost is like waking from a stupor, or like the scales falling from St. Paul's eyes. It is, and you come into this self that you've been shrouding in the wrong kind of
So when you
veil.
came out of that 30 days, you had that wonderful gift, if you will, of deliverance. I mean, but still. That's just the very, very, very beginning. Yes, and then I actually went back to Boston, and again, in the story of the prodigal son, he doesn't add the times when you go back to the mire for a little while. And I never went back to the mire. I never drank again, but I really thought I wanted to do it myself. I'm a self-starter. I'm a self-finisher. Give me a book. I'll figure out how to do it. It was that thing. And really all that is based on fear. Again, people won't like me, or I won't like them. Awkwardness of human interaction. And I went back and I continued to hang out at the bars without drinking and kind of indulge in the behavior I did in the bars. And that's a real challenge.
And even though I was right, and I was definitely better, but simply by virtue of not physically drinking. But I hit a spiritual bottom of sort of, I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to drink again, because I couldn't live with myself. I knew.
Well, you had said that even that first time you drank, there was a change about yourself that you kind of got used to and liked, right? I mean, it brought you out a little bit.
Well, yeah, but it's always extremely temporary. It's,
Right. And so when you go to not having that aid anymore.
Well, it's right. You know the anesthesia of drinking. And again, to come to yourself, Christ says, come awake. Right? The foolish and the wise virgin, keep your lamp in oil and stay awake. And boy, to stay awake in this culture that is built to anesthetize us from the moment now that we are born. Here's a screen or whatever. Here's stuff to buy. Here's glitter. Here's till the moment we die. Now we're just going to cut off death. Oh, let's just euthanize. We want to cut off all suffering. So to face the world without, I sort of wasn't ready for it yet. And this is where the culture comes in. Now, I don't blame the culture in which I was raised, again, for any of my behavior, but I was raised during the 60s and 70s, and I took something good from that. And that was, I took the sort of peace and love. I mean, in and of them, those are good, those are wonderful things. I didn't understand that the way that I had gone about trying to seek those things was completely self-centered and doomed to failure, and the whole women's movement thing, and all that entailed with, oh, we're going to be like guys, and it's powerful to sleep around. And I had also had abortions, by the way. I mean, these deep, deep wounds. And I think that time for me when I wasn't drinking but hit a bottom with that kind of behavior was really another kind of an essential part of the journey, because it just showed me the absolute lie of that part of the culture, that party line that we're fed. I knew that didn't comport with my deepest conscience. So I asked for help, basically, and I started attending this fellowship of recovering alcoholics and addicts that is very, actually, without in any way being, it's like resolutely, not anti-religion, but a-religion. It's spiritual, not religious. Okay. But through that and through, it's actually, in a sense, very Catholic. It's right. Let's do a moral inventory, which is really an examination of conscience. Let's write it down. Who do you resent? What are your fears? What's the horrible stuff you've done? What's the stuff that's been done to you? And let's tell it to God and another human being. It doesn't have the sacramental dimension, but still, it's got that idea and the freedom that comes from that, from telling your secrets, from telling the things that have kept you blocked, was, again, not in a cataclysmic, oh, my life, but in a deep inner way, oriented me more and more towards God. And I just was so grateful to be sober, to not have a hangover, to hear the birds, and then I got married very early in sobriety. My then husband and I moved to Los Angeles. He was a carpenter, woodworker, and I had a brother in LA who, that was his line of work. So he said, "Come on out. I'll give him a job." And we were sort of in the first blush of new love, and we said, "Oh, let's have this big adventure." If you live in New England, no one moves to Los Angeles. It's just the Antichrist and who would ever live there. But we went, and strangely, LA gets such a bad rap. I write a weekly arts and culture column for Angeles News, our archdiocesan newspaper. So I get to be kind of a civic booster for Los Angeles. Los Angeles to me is another home that I found. I mean, New England's always home too, but I ended up converting in Los Angeles. I ended up quitting my job as a lawyer and coming into the church in Los Angeles. So for me, LA is a very...
Maybe we'll pause there, Heather. We'll take our break and come back.
Okay.
Because your story is powerful in many ways, one of which is, alcoholism, there's my problem. So once you got rid of that, I must be okay. Well,
but not quite.
Yeah, and that's true for all of us.
Right.
That's true for all of us, folks. And so the work of the Holy Spirit in our life to cut through the layers of the onion to get down to who we really are. And so we'll come back in a moment with Heather's story. And I do invite you, if you yourself are in such a journey, or you know someone, I would encourage you to call Coming Home Network and connect us at chnetwork.org. On the website, you see lots of conversion stories like Heather's. But also you can get in community with others on the journey. So we hope you can connect up with us. All right, see you there. Welcome back to the Journey Home. I'm your host, Marcus Grodi, and our guest is Heather King. All right, Heather, as we mentioned, during the break, the producer mentioned, or reminded us of that story about Jesus where he talks about removing a demon, and then before you know it, 7 more have come back in. I mean, is there a connection there in your own life?
Well, definitely. I mean, I sort of have a addictive personality, if there is such a thing. So I have also struggled a lot with sort of romantic obsession, kind of making a person into a god. And that's another, it goes way beyond, oh, I'm just kind of interested in that person, and really becomes kind of a compulsive way of thinking. So, but
you landed out in L.A. You've been recently married, and
yes, and my husband and I, and it was interesting because when we got married, I absolutely, again, not Catholic yet, but absolutely understood on some level that marriage is a sacrament. I didn't. Of
may
course,
not have used that word, but
yes, and you take a vow, and it is for life. I understood in some sense it was ordered to the larger community, but mostly it was a vow, and you are faithful, and you're faithful to the vow and faithful to your spouse. And that was something that appealed to me deeply after my life. And it goes to the fact, again, of God and our conscience being so inbuilt. Listen, we all know it's what we want, right? Yeah. We long for a partner, of course, who is faithful to us. And we actually long to step up to the plate and make that sacrifice and do that for someone else. And I had that deeply with all that. But so we eloped to Nantucket and got married by a justice of the peace. I liked that because it was cheap and only cost $35. I was in New England thrift. But as I look back, God bless us, we didn't have the grounding. I mean, if you don't have the church as the bedrock and the true sacrament, we didn't have the grounding. And I was maybe 2 years sober. As I look back, I had so many wounds that I'd not even begun to look deeply at, much less to heal. And the same for him, I think, probably. And so we moved to LA, and we actually stayed married for 14 years. And we were faithful, and in many ways the marriage bore fruit. I mean, he accompanied me on a long leg of my journey. I'm eternally grateful to him, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man. But during that time, so we came to LA. I began working as a lawyer. I passed the California bar. Now, as I said, I had no desire to be a lawyer, but I started working as a lawyer, and this was my thinking. And this is another. I suppose you could say old ideas or wrong ideas are in a sense a kind of demon. And so my thought, because I totally I believed in God, I wanted this person sort of to thank. And I was very intent on doing God's will. What is God's will? And the fact that I didn't want to be a lawyer, I just sort of disregarded and thought, come on, look at you and your pipe dreams. You have to be out of step. Why can't you just step up to the plate and be a normal citizen, contributing person like everyone else? Listen, people would give their right arm to have this law degree. I was working in Beverly Hills at the time. Wow. So I had achieved, in a sense, the American dream. Job that represents power, property, prestige, married, living in Los Angeles. Everything should be fine, right? And here I hit a bottom, another kind of bottom. And really it was an existential bottom because I didn't want to be a lawyer. I was okay at it. I wasn't great, but I wasn't horrible. I mean, I'm super sort of almost neurotically conscientious. And so I would do my work and go and argue motions and all that, but my heart was so not in it, and it was killing me. And what came up, and by this time, by the way, I'm also making money for the first time in my life. I was in my early 40s. I had lived hand to mouth my whole life. So I'm making, I think it was $72,000 a year, which at the time, this is early 90s, was just a huge, I mean, to me, it's still a huge sum of money, but I had health insurance for the first time in my life. And I was also making a lot more money than my husband. But what comes up is this call of my heart to write, that I had absolutely thought I must have squelched that in the bars. I must have killed that dream. And it came up literally almost like it's not that I heard a voice, but, vocare, I mean, it was a call. And man, I heard it. And I thought, oh God, are you kidding me? What am I supposed to quit this job? Am I supposed to just embark on this crazy, insane. Because right away, in LA, if you say you're a writer, people think you mean TV writer usually, or movie writer, and they make tons of money. But I knew that was not the kind of writer I was talking about. I was talking about sort of, I didn't even know what it would look like, but I knew it was creative, sort of literary writing, and deeply from my heart, and that I would be guided somehow. And my mentor, by the way, my literary and spiritual mentor to this day, one of them, Flannery O'Connor, who I cannot mention practically without weeping. I mean, and I had her, partly because of her just genius writing itself, but then her life of deep suffering and sort of exile, died young, suffered from lupus, was by all accounts a lifelong celibate, and a deep, deep Catholic. And so I undergo this kind of Garden of Gethsemane of, what am I supposed to just quit this job? Just sounds crazy. Should I, I tried the thing of, I'll work during the day and write at night. It didn't work because it's so all consuming to be a lawyer. And I started ducking into churches to pray. I'd go argue a motion, and then lo and behold, there's a church open. How often have you heard this? And you're right? Doesn't this happen all the time? So interesting. There's a church, the door's open. And so I would duck in and pray, literally just weeping, Lord, let me know your will. I so wanted to do the right thing. Didn't want to be a quitter. Didn't want to disappoint my parents. Mostly didn't want to make a fool of myself. I mean, that's another huge fear, right? Of being a loser, of being ridiculed. I'm going to fail. And this letter of Flannery O'Connor's, somehow my eyes fell on it, like our eyes do. And it was in a letter she wrote to a friend or a reader. And she said, God cares nothing for success, no gracefulness. He cares only that we do the most that we can with what he's given us. And I said, that is it. That gave me permission to quit my job and start to write. And I didn't, I had other sort of freelance work lined up, and I saved up money. I didn't just do that, I'll just let God take care of me. I mean, it was, I had a little plan, but I did. I quit the job. It took this process of probably 3 years or so. And so that was huge. It was the first time in my life, and I realized I would serve a long, long apprenticeship, and I was happy to do that. I mean, nowadays everyone's a writer, and they, go fund me so I can make a move. It's like, I'm all about, no, you pay your dues. You live on cheese and crackers for 10 years. Come on.
I'm sure I've said this on the journey home, but it used to be when somebody created a joke in Boston, it had to be a really good joke if it was going to get to LA, because it had to go from mouth to mouth. Right. Today, you write a joke in Boston, it's in China because of the internet. So any author could be an author in a second. Right.
But authorship now is everything is so much about branding, and I have a hook, and I want to sell. And I never, ever had, of course I wanted and needed to make a living, and in fact now do a modest living. But it was always, for me, again, as I look back, really almost a religious vocation. It was a matter of obedience to this call. And also there was nothing like obedience. Yeah. There's nothing you'd rather do, actually, in the deepest, deepest place of your heart. And you're also obedient to this call. And if I never make a penny, if I'm a complete failure, that's fine. But I cannot miss the mark that completely. And this kind of goes to the idea of Christ's call to live. Of course, we're for life. We're for life in every form, from the womb to the deathbed. And we're for living life fully. And the question for me was, I could do this safe, predictable, that is such a temptation. That probably is a bigger temptation. We talk about sex and all kinds of those kinds of sins, but really, I think in large part, the temptation is the security of money, of let me have my life mapped out, my IRA, people will admire me, give me a gold watch, all of that. And I just thought, if I do not at least try to follow this call of my heart, that will be the biggest missing of the mark of my entire life, which is saying something.
So in a sense, you were doing this because you believe this is what God calling you to do.
Yes.
But you didn't have any religious practicing right now, did you yet at that point?
No, but what I was doing and had done is I was searching for God, and I was reading widely, and that's how I kind of came. Because I forgot to say, this is a major point. While I was at that law office, I somehow one day brought that blue cloth-bound Bible that I had gotten when I'd been baptized as a kid, that I had kept strangely through all the dark years, I had kept the Bible, and I can't remember. I brought the Bible with me to work, and this is what happened, because I was reading widely and just kind of totally eclectically. I had no grounding. I mean, I literally almost didn't know the difference between the Old Testament and the New, but I was reading. I mean, I'd read St. Augustine's Confessions in college without having sort of any understanding, but I read them now with a sort of, oh, this is heart to heart. I get what he's talking about. I read Chesterton. I read wonderful book, Romano Guardini's The Lord. That helped me so much because it showed me the person of Christ, this astonishing figure who has the courage to go through the world unarmed in every way and to speak the truth, this integrity that is just beyond anything that you've ever seen in a human being. So I bring the Bible with me and I read the Gospels. No, I mean, I am not immersed in Catholic culture. I know no Catholic. I know no priest. I have no real theological grounding besides this kind of, I read the Gospels. And that was it. The living water. Again, we worry about evangelizing. It's like, don't worry. Christ does the evangelizing. Everyone knows who he is. The Gospels are there. The Mass is there. If you're hungry enough, that's my experience anyway. You'll find your way.
So how did you, I mean, I can see the work of the Holy Spirit, and that does happen in our lives, but you still had to get off of that little blue book into some church over there.
Yes.
So how did you actually get over there?
Well, and as I said, I had started ducking into churches to pray. And from that really came this, again, the eyes opening and realizing I have a deep urge to worship. There was no other word for it, worship. And I wanted to be on my knees. You know, again, deep, no one tells you this stuff. It's, you let it, it's deep in your heart. And so I started going around, as I said, I've been raised Protestant, so I went around to all the Protestant churches and I just, the empty cross, the sort of, to me, this kind of social club atmosphere. No, the meat isn't here, literally, right? The meat that I want to be called to my highest self. I wanted, again, we want something that is severe in the sense of being, listen, the stakes are life and death. I was concerned about the state of my soul, you know, and you don't need bromides and spirituality light. You want to hear, listen, this is the deal. Yeah, your soul, right? So I went around, I went to the Episcopal Church. I wrote a whole book about my conversion. It's called Redeemed. But anyway, then there was the last place, right? The Catholic Church. And it wasn't as my last choice. It was, again, I felt it's kind of, it's so steeped in sort of secret. I thought, well, they know that I'm not Catholic, you know, that there's some secret code or some sort of gesture or something. I knew you're supposed to.
There is a special handshake.
They're supposed to kneel. They haven't told me, given that to me yet. But what happened was I ended up going to a daily Mass. Finally, I just had to go. Daily Mass, St. Basil's. I was living in Koreatown, LA at the time. And it was a noon Mass. I think this was before the internet practically. So I think I just saw it on the board or I found it in the yellow pages or something, but it was right up the street. And I went in and Koreatown is just teeming. It's like the middle of Manhattan or something. It's just crazy high rises and tons of people. And I walked into this church and the first thing I noticed, the high ceiling, right? The holy waterfall, the whole thing, everything as a church is designed to do, draw your mind and your heart upward. But also that it was quiet. There were people of every stripe, in there kneeling, praying before Mass, and I got this is consecrated time. It is consecrated space. I just got it, right? And they say the Mass. I don't know nothing about what's going on because you try to follow along. You know, I see, oh, here's a missal, and you find Sunday. Yeah, but it's not Sunday. You don't know. I mean, you just don't know anything. What does ANT period mean? You know, even if you find that little day in the back of the day, I had no idea what was going on. So I just drank it in. And what I heard, and meanwhile, the body and the cross, I'm just fixated on, and I knew without having the theology, this is a cosmos apart from an empty cross. There's a body. And I heard, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you, but only say the word and I shall be healed. And that was when I said, this is the place I've been looking for my whole life. I just knew it. And that was it, you know, and I knew I somehow found my way to an RCIA. I mean, that was it. I just never wavered. I mean, not that I've not, I mean, please, but never wavered from my absolute, this is the North Star. This is what I am meant for. This is what I was born for. Found RCIA, converted, came into the church, took my first communion at the Church of the Blessed Sacrament on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, California. Beautiful. From the beginning, often loved Mass, you know, often daily Mass goer, began praying the office. Meanwhile, however, my husband did not convert, was not remotely interested. And that's a big, big schism. It's a joy that you can't share. It's what should be the bedrock of the marriage. So I had changed so much during this. I had really sort of found myself, you know, I'd come to myself as a writer, as a Catholic. And so about 6 years later, and we just kind of stumbled on, but, you know, and I had lots of adventures. And I got cancer. I went through the deaths of both parents, both prolonged, both agonizing deaths. And that's another kind of reordering of your, oh God, I thought we had a pact. I thought if I was good, my people wouldn't suffer or something. You know, we're constantly undergoing the death of another attachment, another sort of old idea. But anyway, the marriage eventually actually ended. And I think in large part because of I just saw, some people can have two vocations, can have the marriage, which is absolutely a vocation, and the writing. And I just saw, I can't, for whatever reason, I just can't. So we were divorced. I had the marriage annulled. And then I served that long apprenticeship. And as it turned out, my writing, I just couldn't not somehow write in some sense about God, it seemed, as hard as I often try to, or at least through that lens. And so it came about, and I say this kind of for all the aspiring writers, you know, a lot of times people will say, oh, you know, they think, like, can you introduce me to someone, or who was your mentor? Do you know? And I just say, I had no mentor. I knew no one. Even today, I just go by, do I like this person? Do I respond to this person? I have tons of, you know, it so happens I have lots of friends now who are priests. I have some friends who are writers, but to me, it's always the human relationship. But anyway, it turned out that I would begin to write for the church, really. For Magnificat, that was something I've applied for a million things that I've gotten rejected for. Magnificat came out of the blue. This friend of mine, Rita Simmons, gave Father Peter Cameron, who at that time was the editor, just gave him one of my books. And they asked me to begin writing for Magnificat, so I've done that for many years. And
you have a new book. How did that come out of your journey? The Sure to Flame, A Year with Teresa of Lisieux.
Well, that's actually not that new now. That was, I think, 2009. I have 10 books, I think. But that's, Sure to Flame is probably, because we love Therese, that's why. And Therese, actually, that came out of a year, this was post-divorce, when I was a year of my sort of 30-year midlife crisis. But it's a book about, Paraclete Press approached me and said, would you be interested in writing a book about a saint, not a hagiography, but sort of walking with the spirituality of a saint. I picked Saint Therese partly because we seemed such an really unlikely couple. Therese was a cradle Catholic, a lifelong virgin, died very, very young, super pious family. And I found her spirituality, and she has become such a companion and a touchstone in this cultural world of where the whole world, even the Catholic world, often says you need to have a brand, you need to have a big, huge social media presence. My thing is kind of, to me, the more fully lived and richer my life, the less I need to be posting about it every second. My life is, it's an inner life, even though I'm also, in some sense, a public figure. But Therese, who's in this obscure Carmelite convent, way before the advent, even of the telephone, wants to be a saint, burns to be a saint, and has no worry whatsoever about how that will happen or that it will happen, and goes about her obscure, quiet, hidden life, burning with love. Our vocation is love. So,
and becomes recognized as the patron saint of missionaries.
And becomes right, and becomes one of the four female doctors of the church. I mean, it's not so much that she's loved. That's not what we're after. It's that she brings people to Christ the world over. So, my vocation is love. I mean, my life is, it's very person to person. I went out into the parking lot before I came on, and I have a email from a friend back home, recovering alcoholic, struggling, has gone in and out. Heather, my heart is just so heavy this morning. And I said, I'm going to go into, I happen to be in Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to go into the chapel and pray for you. And you say a prayer for, I mean, it's a thing, it's not how many followers do I have, it's how present am I, body, mind, and soul, to the person across from me at the table, to the person in the car with me, to the person who I share my household with, to my next door neighbor. Can I put my phone down for 15 minutes? That for us today is a true sacrifice, right?
You know, Heather,
it's an act of charity, and it costs you.
When I think about your journey, and I think about, I know from emails and such and letters that we have a lot of people that watch the journey home, lifelong Catholics and sometimes lifelong non-Catholic Christians whose children and siblings have left the faith, and they wonder, what could I ever do to get them back? But then I hear your story, and by God's grace and mercy, he's brought you back through all that stuff, you know. And a lot of the little things that happen in your life, we wouldn't recommend. No, if you do that,
right?
No,
this isn't the blueprint.
But you're really a witness of how the Lord can reach into somebody's life and awaken the seed of faith, and then nurture it, and then bring you home. And then you use gifts you didn't even think you had.
Exactly.
To be a witness for Jesus Christ in his church. Praise God.
Well, also, if I can make it, anybody can. Your straying kid can. And I just want to say, the Gospels are a program of attraction, not promotion, right? Like, live a life that has some joy in it in the midst of deep, deep suffering. That's what attracts people. They say, what does this person have? They have something that's kind of interesting. Well,
in your family, you said one time did an intervention, but what that also tells me is you always had a family that cared. And, you know, what do we do? Well, we can pray for our family members that have left. We can pray and love them.
Absolutely.
And, you know, that's the most important things we can do.
Yes, love them where they are and how they are, as Christ loves us.
What's another one of your books that you recommend for folk?
Wow. My book, Holy Desperation, which is a book about prayer, I like that. It has a lot of kind of 12-step spirituality. It won Best Book of the Year from the National Association of Catholic Publishers. And my newest book, I'm just going to make a little plug. I'm self-publishing it. It's called Ravished, Notes on Womanhood. And it is about how the church, contrary to all cultural belief and hatred, how the church, of all places, the place that has brought me as a woman to my full sort of flower of womanhood and personhood. So we're all about Mary, also. That's another huge subject, but yeah.
Next time on, we'll have a whole
Yes.
hour on that, all right?
Yeah.
Heather, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus. Thanks a million.
And thank you for your witness, and God bless you. You continued writing for Magnificat and all the other things you do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. You know, you heard Heather's story. I hope her story was an encouragement to you. If you'd like help along the journey, please don't forget, you can contact us at chnetwork.org. We'd love to hear your story. And if there's a way we can pray and stand beside you, we'd love to do that. So thank you. And God bless you. See you again next week.